When I was in college, I went to Parsons, and one of the prompts was to bring an object that was representative of a uniform to school and build a project around it throughout the course of the year. I brought a blind cane because I thought it was an interesting symbolic identifier of dress. And my teacher said, you should probably change that and go get something else. It's a little simpler, like, a suit or like a firefighter outfit. And I said, I'm sticking to the cane. I'm gonna lean in here. And I ended up building a line of clothing for people who were blind, and spent a year doing ethnographic research and working with blind people to understand their challenges with dress, and uncovered a lot of opportunities for new design systems for people with disabilities and visual impairments.
Hey everybody, welcome to the MO podcast. Today we are thrilled to have Kendall Warson. Kendall is known across the art world for making art accessible as the co-founder and CEO of Cohart, an online social art marketplace. She previously co-founded Wonder Spaces, which brought immersive art exhibitions to secondary markets across the US. She's also had roles as a global art curator and fashion designer for icons like Diane von Furstenberg and Marc Jacobs. Kendall, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. So Kendall, rather than give us, an even longer, more general background and bio, why don't we start? Why don't you tell us what's the most ambitious thing that you did prior to co-founding?
I'm an ambitious person, so I love crazy, complicated projects and initiatives. When I was in college, I went to Parsons, and one of the prompts was to bring an object that was representative of a uniform to school and build a project around it throughout the course of the year. I brought a blind cane because I thought it was an interesting symbolic identifier of dress. And my teacher said, you should probably change that and go get something else. It's a little simpler, like, a suit or like a firefighter outfit. And I said, I'm sticking to the cane. I'm gonna lean in here. And I ended up building a line of clothing for people who were blind, and spent a year doing ethnographic research and working with blind people to understand their challenges with dress, and uncovered a lot of opportunities for new design systems for people with disabilities and visual impairments. And I'd say it was quite ambitious. I was at South by Southwest when I was in my 20s presenting, and thought about launching the company, when I was young, but I still had more to learn. But it was one of those things where I kind of stuck with the challenge in front of me, and it ended up being a much bigger opportunity for growth and learning than I could have foreseen, when I started.
What was the thing that kept you from wanting to launch that company or getting it off the ground?
Yeah, I think, as entrepreneurs, we all know this, that it's challenging, right? It's an uphill battle doing something by yourself with limited experiences, limited resources, not really knowing how to build a company. I sort of knew that it was going to be really, really challenging off the bat. So I ended up leaving fashion and ended up working at a startup, and decided I'm going to learn through the eyes of, someone that's doing this from the ground up. And I'm going to be the first employee. I'm going to get in at the ground floor and understand how companies are scaled and built. And I'm really glad I did that at the end of the day, because I got that firsthand experience, but I wasn't on my own, and I think you do need partners to bring big visions to life. And there's nothing like firsthand experience, but sometimes having a secondhand experience helps you get your feet wet.
I totally agree. I have no idea how I would have ever built Earbits had I not been the second employee at a startup and seen something get built from the ground up. And, also I didn't come from a family of entrepreneurs. So it was just seeing people actually build a company. I don't know that I would have ever thought to build a company until I'd been at a startup and seen, people I consider my peers do the same thing. I think that a lot of, I think working at a startup, it gives you a leg up when you start your own company for sure. I found that project so interesting. What were some of the things the challenges with, dress and fashion for blind people that you uncovered, and what were some of the things that you thought were worth doing?
Yeah, I mean, Parsons was all about being in the field they say just get out there and start talking to users, and which I think is very applicable to startups and to building businesses. You want to build things that people care about, and you want people to have a use case for your product that solves a pain point. So I spent a lot of time doing user interviews with blind people and talking to them about how they, chose what they were wearing and how they deciphered their own systems of dress. And I found that for a lot of people, it's actually not that profound, but clothing is tied to confidence. Like when we get dressed every morning, it is a decision. It's, empowering us to put forward an identity into the world and move out into the world with a statement and something that, is a personality. It's a decision. And when you're blind, you don't have that autonomy. Oftentimes you're choosing something and you don't really know what you look like, or someone's choosing things for you. And a lot of blind people shop with friends, and they keep little pins in clothing to identify certain types of garments, and they will wear like very minimal stylistic outfits. Like they're not going to go out and wear a bunch of polka dots because it's daunting, right? And so in that way, it's kind of inhibits your self-expression and your ability to feel more confident in your own skin. And I met this one blind woman who just totally demystified that whole notion and was wearing heels and crazy dresses, and she just loved to express herself through style. And I studied how she kept track of her clothing system, and she would go shopping with people. She would have this really complex tagging structure, so she understood what was what, and then she would mix and match things, and really just again find a way to express her individuality through dress. And she always thought she looked good. She had this extra bravado whenever she was walking around. So one of the big initiatives I worked on was a tagging system that helped blind people understand what garments went with other garments. And then I found that a lot of people with sight also needed the same system, and that there's a lot of challenge just in general to like what do you wear every morning, and if you don't have quote unquote style, it's really nice to have a system of dress and to understand how designers are thinking about combining things together, and to have that be something that you feel confident in. So that was one of the biggest ones. And I found that 90% of people have visual impairments and they're not fully blind. And so it's like, how do you give these people tools to feel more comfortable with their choices? And then that choice is what gives you that confidence. And that confidence is what empowers you as an individual going out there in the world.
What did you learn from your background in fashion, this project, working for designers, that was most applicable when you decided to launch Cohart and move into the visual art world?
I always say the hardest workers come from the fashion industry. It's not for the faint of heart. It's pretty cutthroat and fast-paced. But beyond that, fashion is a system. It's not just one clothing piece that is sitting in a box. There's a marketing effort, there's merchandising, there's production, there is the financial business aspect. And I think because it was such a system-centric industry, I got really interested with broader ways that more antiquated models operate and function. And within the art world, everything's interconnected. It's not just like people buy a painting to buy a painting. There's a whole identity component. There's how it's merchandised. There's the story and the narrative. There's the artist process. So I think it gave me a much richer understanding of, again, how systems work within society and how you can build something that has an impact on an industry on a more holistic level than just something in a vacuum, that isn't necessarily having a broader impact across multiple users.
What do you think the system then of the art world is, or at least the system of the art world that Cohart in particular is trying to address, and how is it sort of, again, I'm very fascinated by fashion as an industry, as a parallel to, or as a model for a lot of what artists and the art world could be doing or could be interested in, even though it's a world, I think, as you've probably discovered too, is like that artists are becoming more interested in, the art world is becoming more interested in, but for a very long time was kind of held at arm's length, right? I even think of an old colleague of mine, Natasha Deegan, who teaches at Fashion Institute of Technology now, even wrote like an op-ed in the New York Times about fashion and the system of fashion kind of, decaying the art world and undoing the systems of taste and prestige and what have you that were important to some sense of value within the sort of conventional elite world of the arts. I don't know if I buy that take, but it's certainly one that's out there. So I'm curious to hear your sort of opinions on it in terms of the sort of the way that fashion intersects with the art world, both at the level of kind of value creation, system setting, and how the sort of players exist within inside of that.
Yeah, I mean, something I realized at Parsons was that fashion is one of the most accessible mediums. We all wear clothing every day. In a lot of ways, again, we're all empowered to go out there in the world and make a statement. I think with art, because oftentimes your collection is in your home, maybe it's a little bit more reserved, or it's more of something you keep to yourself. I think there's many more risk takers in the fashion world that are out there, that don't necessarily have like an MFA from a fashion school, but they're calling themselves stylists, and they're going out there and doing editorial shoots and posting their creations. And so I think the barrier to entry is much more accessible in a lot of ways. But what's interesting in terms of the parallels is, of course, that branding, Russian doll stacking system, right? Where you have the art world, if you're an artist and you're showing within a gallery, or the gallery is showing within a broader fair, like there's all these names that are creating this tree of value association. And within fashion, it's similar, right? Like brands are power. Brands are how you associate value with the clothing itself. And it's not like everything's produced in Italy. Like things are produced all over the world, and you could have the same garment that's produced in the same place, sewn by the same person with the same material, and it could be priced, radically differently depending on how it's merchandised, and again, the brand name behind it, and the story, and that identity piece. And so I think that's very similar in art. That people do want to purchase something that has an identity element to it. They want to understand the core value that comes through that tastemaking, and they want to be a part of a culture and of a community, in the same way that when we dress, we're part of a tribe, we're part of a group and a system, that we're choosing to be a part of, by making that choice, by wearing that garment. So again, I think it's changing a lot, like the way that people are interacting with art, and the way that people, maybe moving more towards how people have interacted with fashion. But I think it's really interesting to see that crossover, and to see more fashion designers talking about art, and working with artists, and more artists, expressing themselves through fashion and sharing that on Instagram and building a brand for themselves. And I think it's ultimately that whole world building exercise that everyone's trying to do, to communicate value, to communicate impact, to differentiate themselves in the world.
I have just one last question about the blind project, because I've always had a real serious problem with authority, especially in school systems, and so I'm curious what happened with your grade and with this teacher that told you that you should change your plan. Once you stuck with it, what was the outcome?
I actually did well at Parsons. At the end, uplifted me. I think Parsons is at an interesting time when they were trying to rebrand themselves under the umbrella of, again, social impact, and thinking about fashion that was produced sustainably for underserved communities. And that project really hit that on the head, even though in the beginning they didn't think it was going to get there. It did. So that was another thing, you learn as an entrepreneur, like people tell you no, and sometimes you just have to change that to saying yes in your head, and keep going, and show them the outcome, because not everyone will understand or see the vision from day one.
Awesome. I had a feeling that was going to be the answer, because it sounds like a really amazing project. So, let's address the elephant in the room. Tell us about Cohart. What is Cohart, for those of our listeners who might not know, and what makes Cohart different from other art marketplaces?
Yeah, so we started Cohart as a social art marketplace, a space where artists could come on and directly connect with their collectors. They could share videos of their work. You can chat within the community. Collectors can showcase their collections. They can trade art. They can make mood boards. It's much richer than a conventional transaction experience that might happen online. And that was driven from the insight that, again, the art world is driven by community, and that connection is what fuels commerce. And a lot of these product marketplaces that exist, it's like a JPEG and a price point, and it's just in this vacuum. And for us, like what we've seen is just people, again, buy art because it's an identity fueled purchase, and they want to feel like they're part of a community, and they want that connection to the artist, and they want the story. And as they empower themselves to collect in that manner, then they want to share that with more people, and it creates these virtuous cycles of growth. Again, it started there, and as we've scaled up and learned more about what the community needs, we've actually seen like bigger opportunity around infrastructure for the art world, and helping to create tools for collectors to manage the value of their collections and have opportunities to appraise or to get insurance for their collections, tools for artists like CRM systems, price advising tools, inventory management. A lot of them are SMBs, and they don't have this SMB enablement system. And then also art advisors, and people that are splitting payments between multiple parties, and they are curating with PDFs and then sending QuickBooks invoices. So now we're very focused on what are some of these, again, vertical SaaS tools that create a lot of value within this network, that encourage people in the art world to move a lot of offline behaviors or workaround behaviors online with a tool that's built specifically for them. And the goal is that, everyone will participate more in the network and be more engaged in the community because they have a real value add for their business needs on the back end.
Sid, I'm interested. You created a community marketplace with a lot of artists who need to connect with collectors and buyers. So I've got a series of questions here, but a lot of it has to do with, it's sometimes a little bit of a chicken and an egg problem, right? When you have this kind of two-sided marketplace. So I'm curious for you, when you first got going with the project, which did you have, the chicken or the egg, when you began? Did you have the artists that you wanted to get onto the platform and begin to market and display what it was they were up to? Or was it more of a challenge or more of an effort to begin to do the marketing, do outreach, push out into the landscape and find the consumers who are going to be active on the platform?
Yeah. I guess our egg or the chicken, whatever, the starting one that we started with was the artist.
Yeah. It's hard to know which one you begin with.
Yeah. So I guess it was called Egg the Artist. We have really rich networks of artists. My co-founder, Shaveen, has had a gallery for 2 decades, and she's based in Southeast Asia, and I was in the US. And so we sort of thought, okay, what if we start within these 2 segments and we bring artists on board? And we tried to lower the barrier to entry as much as possible. So we spent a lot of time onboarding them and posting their work for them and editing their content and their videos, and trying to understand, again, what would encourage them to stay beyond meeting a new collector. And we got to a point where artists started to bring their collectors to us to say, hey, can I actually use Cohart as this payment transaction tool that's more credible than Venmo or PayPal? And then we started to see the collectors coming in, and then they were like, well, now I support my favorite artist's work, but I also want to showcase the rest of my collection. And so we had a little bit of supply driving demand flywheel to kick things off. And then now we're in the point where we're segmenting demand and trying to think about who are the types of collectors that we really want to focus on. It's a huge market, and it's global. Everyone's different ages, different comfort with buying online, and different experience levels, right? So we've had about $2.5 million in sales, and buyers in every continent besides Antarctica, and all different ages, all different interest levels, more interior motivations, more personal identity motivations, more financial asset motivations. So we're in the phase of trying to, again, figure out what do we stand for? What type of collector do we really want to build an experience for? And how do we scale up that marketing for them? And so it's an interesting phase of our company where, the supply driving demand gets you so far, but then you need more demand, and you need to create that top of funnel experience and that journey that helps people find what they love within the marketplace.
How did you capture those motivations? How did you figure out through the platform what it is that the reasons or the rationales for various different buyers buying the work that they're doing. Because sometimes, if I think of a standard kind of online transaction, there might be a little bit of communication, but it's, it may be visible to you on the platform, but it's like someone knows what they want, they reach out, they get it, and that's the sort of end of it. So how do you segment now those various different collector groups based on those motivations?
We've done a ton of market research, so everything from surveys on it's not MailChimp, SurveyMonkey, to looking at market reports and seeing how buying behaviors have changed in the past couple of years and how they're projected to change going forward. Also, just general user research with people. We talk to folks and say, hey, like, why do you buy art today? What's important to you about that experience? And then segmenting, into different persona profiles. And again, a lot of follow-ups with everyone. Customer service is like, most important thing. But we've also just had a lot of really passionate buyers that have come through the pipeline and want to share their opinions with us and have a vision for what they want Cohart to be. And so we've been able to work very closely with a lot of them. I think because that passion is there, and it's not like they're buying a toothbrush, they're buying something that they're living with. And so sometimes we have people that email us 6 months later and like, oh, I see this painting in a whole new light now, or I'd love to be able to get emails from these artists that I'm collecting from. And that's super informative to us as we structure a roadmap towards making sure that they become power users and that they stay engaged with the artists that they're collecting from. Because it really is a power user behavior. Once you start collecting, it's a verb, right? Like you want to get out there and keep doing it and keep discovering and keep supporting the artists and getting their updates and sharing that with other people.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm curious, what do you hear from the artists that are, now using these tools or on the platform, connecting with their collectors? What are their sort of primary interests that they want out of Cohart as a place that they want to continue to sell through, to engage with, and to be the kind of primary platform that they're involved with as they're building their art making practice or sustaining their art making practice?
Yeah, I mean, it's always more collectors, right? That's always what you hear, of course. But
Right.
but beyond that, one thing is the business model. Artists obviously get 50 to 70% of their sales taken away when they're selling through a gallery because they're doing all the marketing and there's the brick and mortar presence. But even on platforms like Saatchi Art, they take 40%. And I think the more that artists are selling through Cohart, like the more we're trying to incentivize them to stay with us and so to not take these steep commissions. And I'm really interested in exploring other types of payment structures. So like a sliding scale around, if you want us to do your shipping and insurance, if you want us to do your authentication, if you want us to do the customer service with your buyer, or maybe you want to do it all yourself. And depending on what you want to do as an artist, like we plug in at that commission take rate. And I think that that's more like of an evolved model that works well for artists and again keeps them engaged. The other thing that's really challenging about being an artist today is just the content expectations. Artists are expected to like feed the feed, so to speak, on Instagram all the time. And we've had a couple artists come to us who do know their demographic. They say they feel icky about advertising and they would love to do it through Cohart as a way to sort of pay us that sets up a system for them to reach new buyers through Instagram as well, and can capture buyers on Instagram more effectively. So we're exploring a lot of tools that integrate into link in bios and that help them build, again, more of an audience that become collectors and setting up more of that funnel for them. So that way it's not just people see something and then they vanish. Because it does take a while to feel confident to buy something. A lot of art isn't cheap, and great art, isn't something that you're necessarily going to impulse purchase. And so having, a way to build more of a meaningful connection and then sit with that thought, and for that artist to basically have that potential buyer in like a CRM system and in this sales pipeline, to get updates and to keep seeing things, and then eventually make a purchase. Like that's a really important system that we think we are uniquely equipped to build, and that can help relieve a lot of the stress of just posting sporadically on Instagram and not really getting a lot of, again, substance or like use case into serious buyers. So figuring out, again, low intent to high intent, and just how to structure that in a way that operates really well for them.
I'm curious about this. So much of the art world as it is currently defined is very, let's say, brick and mortar, real time social, right? That it's, I mean, even though I think Instagram and the idea that there's a ton of transactions and communications that happens online and is highly mediated, it still seems like it's a world that's very much dominated by the physical kind of in presence, being together model of, or being together with the work in some physical space. How do you find, I mean, it sounds like you're beginning to navigate some of that with these kinds of like the dinners and some other types of things, but how do you imagine that either you evolving towards more of the kind of physicality, or what's your hypothesis on how kind of the art world itself, the more sort of brick and mortar conventional art fair, gallery, museum, auction nexus, moving more towards a kind of digital distributed model?
Yeah, it's a really important question. And again, it's something that we are actively working on answering. Our current hypothesis and the way that we think about it is, again, more of an infrastructure for offline behaviors. So we just had an artist that was showcasing work in a gallery, and an advisor came in and bought the art and wanted 35%. And the piece is like $10,000, and so they need to split this $10,000 piece and give 35% to the advisor. They need to give a certain segment to the artist, a certain segment to the gallery, and then they need like a payment split tool. And so they were using Cohart as this like payment system that streamlines the payments. There's trust, credibility. It can be held in escrow. And so for us, we think that's really exciting because there are a lot of players in the art market, that are helping bring shows, fairs, exhibitions, galleries to life. And that's what makes it so great, right? Like you have these curators, you have gallerists, you have art handlers, like you have all these pieces of the puzzle, fabricators. And it's sort of like, how does everyone get part of the pie, and how is that more transparent and secure? And so that's something that, again, we're thinking about a lot, and a way that we are starting to experiment with, sort of dovetailing that scarcity experience of something online with something offline, is doing a curated drops and having potentially like an in-person experience where the art is exhibited. And if it's like a dinner that's happening, but there's the drop happening digitally. And if you're at the dinner, you have first access to that experience. But after a certain time period, the other people will have access to it for the work that hasn't been already acquired. And I think that that's really effective, or I think will be effective, because we've sort of tested these like dinner formats, and we've tested the art, being exhibited around the dinner. And I think people just being invited to something and feeling like they are part of an experience is very important. And it's powerful when you collect together, right? When you're starting to collect from the same artist and you're investing in that artist, and you're, again, market making collectively and helping to inspire their career to get to the next level. So, yeah, so those are some of the things that we're doing off the top of my head. And I think in terms of the market, I just think next generation behaviors are kind of shaking things up, right? Where people are so digital, and they want to discover on their phone, and they want to be able to share it with friends. And I think auction houses are trying to figure out how to like move those behaviors online. But I still think brick and mortar is so key, right? So it's just figuring out the relationship between the offline and the online, and I think stitching together an experience that feels more streamlined versus something that feels like it's in a vacuum, and something that feels like, again, it's heavy in-person production.
Yeah, that's interesting. Again, I think that fashion becomes a very, a good model for this, at least in some way, where it's, the sales channels are so very much online and distributed and digital these days, but then also are very reliant on these brick and mortar experiential moments in order to really concretize a brand, a story, and to sort of continue the either the community development, the audience development, the kind of power user recognition that comes with that. And so it's an industry that's evolved I think, further and faster than the art world kind of has, maybe by design, just based on the kinds of institutions that are involved in the art world. But it's certainly one that you could learn from in the art industry more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love the idea of a showroom concept. Like in fashion, you always have your collection that's put in the showroom, and then you have the buyers that come and visit, and then they're deciding what gets put into the department stores. So it's a really interesting model because you're proliferating, culture through this kind of exclusive experience that feels high touch, that's in person, and then people are shopping online. It might not see their size in person and buy it online, but being able to go to the store and be inside that space. I used to do visual merchandising. So it was like everything mattered. It all was a part of the experience, and it puts you in a mindset where you want to be part of that brand. And that's why artist studio visits are really effective. Every time I do an artist studio visit, I buy a piece of art just because I'm there, and you connect with them, and you're hearing about their process, and it's so inspiring. I think sometimes that story gets lost online, and or isn't told effectively. And I think
Right.
it's what makes art, so special and makes art what it is.
Right. Yeah. No, one of the artists that we work with, who's not a big fan of a lot of the kind of in-person social engagement, just because it's not the personality type, push a little bit just to get that in-person experience, especially at a time on the calendar when you've got other events in town in places like New York and LA that you're going to have collectors and other people passing through who are already in the mindset of making these stops, doing these visits. You just do the visit. And even if it's just 6, 7, 8 people actually make it by during, a day, the invitation itself was a touch point. The follow-ups for one-on-ones for the people who couldn't make it is a touch point. It's a way of consolidating a kind of energy that really has a sort of ongoing effectiveness later on in the calendar, which is important to do. And though stressful for a moment, you can kind of build your confidence for at least 6 or 7 hours to try and get it done.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, and sometimes it's fun when the artist has a quirky personality, and maybe they're not as friendly, and sometimes it makes people want to buy it more. So I think it's all part of the branding. And I think it's important for artists.
That's the snotty maitre d host model that you got in New York City for a long time. It was like the worse you were treated up front, the more you wanted to get that table. And
Exactly.
there was a whole art and psychology to it. It just seemed totally ridiculous.
It works.
Some seems to work, right? And a good friend who was an artist in New York, I mean, this was decades ago now, was like, what collectors want from artists is to be treated badly. They want to have an experience with someone who stands outside the normal social mores as an expression of the freedom that they, as collectors and people who have to exist in the workaday world, don't have access to. And so, in fact, that kind of ornery, outrageous, diva type behavior that they might experience at the hands of an artist in the studio or anywhere else is really just a taste of the freedom that they have been lacking in their entire lives and they're trying to achieve. And that's a very arch way of putting it, but it seems like a pretty amusing one for what it is that your kind of everyday collector might be looking for when they are developing relationships with artists or have caught that bug of wanting to keep a foot walking around in the art world with those types of personalities.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It works. I think it works.
How do you create that platform online? What have you learned? I mean, you've got a little bit of a background too in this kind of experiential art world, the kind of the creation of environments. And what, I guess, 2 questions, like, where do you see that as a broader trend or activity heading within the sort of art and entertainment crossover industry, let's say? I don't want to dismiss it out of hand. But for example, Luna Luna is an exhibition that just closed here in Los Angeles and is getting ready to travel. And famously, that's the kind of recreation of this art amusement park, which had opened in Germany in the 1980s and then was lost forever and has now been brought back to life. A bunch of different investors. I went to that. It was an interesting, felt very much like a museum exhibition. And frankly, I was a little disappointed when my children. I learned that I wouldn't be able to take my kids to, ride on the rides, or that there wouldn't be this kind of experiential component. So it felt a little bit more museological than I think it needed to be. But at the same time, I have to say that I was there on a Tuesday morning at 11 a.m. and there were a lot of people walking in to go and see this thing on an average weekday, and so I assume that they got a pretty good audience reaction. But that we've heard things about, the various different kind of pop-up museums, Team Lab, Super Blue, some successes, some failures. You've got a background in this. You're an entrepreneur. You're business savvy. Where do you see that industry heading let's say, in the next 5 years?
It's a rough one. I mean, I think Instagram has been such a dominant force in shaping that narrative. There's such a big difference between something like Super Blue and an Instagram selfie museum. And I think for the everyday person, you're not necessarily educated on that. Like, not everyone knows who James Turrell is, but maybe they think that's the same experience as, again, something that was a set design. And so I think it's kind of degrading is a harsh word, but it sort of degraded a little bit of the installation art world in some ways, because I think a lot of artists, you just throw up some mirrors and like the lights, and then they're like, okay, like even Team Lab gets some, like not every artist is loving Team Lab, because it's a lot of
Oh, for sure. No, they get a lot of flack, right? I mean,
yeah.
But, yeah,
it gets people there though. It's a business, so I think that the opportunity is figuring out how to communicate stories and value around experiential art that is very credible, and making sure that people understand that there's an artist and that there's a narrative behind it, and that in a lot of ways, like, the concept is much richer, or their process is much richer to bring it to life than, again, something just for a photo backdrop. I think the question is just, do consumers care? Does the everyday person really care? Everything's so fast paced, moving so quickly nowadays that it's almost like we don't have time to register that type of depth or information. So that's something that just kind of concerns me about the general public, and just how we are taking in art. I had this one teacher when I was growing up who made us all sit at the MoMA in front of a painting. Or no, it was at the Met. It wasn't contemporary. It was at the Met, and she made us sit there for 5 hours. She's like, "You just sit here 5 hours," and I was so upset and like annoyed. But then it change how you feel after 5 hours, because the artist spent more than 5 hours on it, and when you actually sit there, you pick up all these nuances to it. It does change. Like, I still remember that sculpture in my head, and it changed how I felt about art. And so I
Was
think
this at
there's something
Parsons?
powerful.
I'm pretty sure you can't do this anymore. That sounds like abuse.
Yeah.
These days, that like you're not getting away with that.
Yeah, the kids would just evac. As Parsons.
Yeah, right. Like someone would be out like 15 minutes and be like, "Okay, that's it. I'm done."
Yeah,
See ya.
yeah. 5 hours is a long time, but I don't know. I think there's something about slow art in the same way there's something about slow food, and how do you really appreciate craftsmanship? And again, I think that's sort of been a little bit not jeopardized, but it's challenging with a lot of these selfie-centric ticket models that are popping up, that people come to, and they have the same association in their head as the other art, because they haven't really sat down and understood the nuance of how things are made. So yeah, we'll see. I'll see what happens. I think COVID really rocked it, so it's going to be interesting if it comes back strong, and they're expensive to produce those shows. And so,
right.
We'll see.
Yeah, it's an interesting. I'm always curious about it, because it's like it's a real difference between an asset sale and a ticket sale, right? And at bottom, that is a fundamental change in the way that those experiences are trying to be delivered, right? And I think that the museum as an institution, bills itself as something other than a kind of entertainment. And there's more and more pressure for these institutions not even to have ticket sales in order to be free to the public and to be a public resource and educational institution. And I'm all for that. But then there are the other models about the museum as a arts institution, selling tickets, needing to cultivate its audiences, in a sense, being a kind of experiential industry. that is now, as they say, competing with, films or sports or all the other things that could be, ticket-based experiences and time-based experiences that people have to make a choice of where they're going to spend their time. Versus, Cohart, the community on Cohart, people who are interested in galleries, that are in some sense interested in kind of like, they're not engaging in these experiences. They're buying assets, right? Like they're, and it's not necessarily an investment asset for everyone, but there's a sense that there's something more that's going on other than the like, the punctual experience that someone is getting into. And I'm always curious about, I don't, not that you can only operate at the extremes, but it seems like things that have sort of too simply been in the hybrid zone of those don't seem to work out as well, or at least over the long run don't seem to work out as well. Sometimes there might be a model that works, but it seems like it's tough because can't be both an asset based experience and a museum based experience. But maybe I'll be proven wrong.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I haven't seen it done well. Again, there's the like Candytopia where you go through these experiences and then you go in a gift shop and it feels so weird, right? And then you also have like museums that have incredible installations and people sometimes don't even sit and watch the whole thing or they don't experience it. And so I think that the powerful aspects of experiential art that I've seen have been at places that are more festivals or fairs or public installations where people are with their families and they have this thought-provoking or the shared experience where they don't even realize that they're looking at art. And I think that that's really exciting when you have people that are connecting to that experience and it's legit and it's curated and it's thoughtful and it changes the way people see the world, and I think that that's something that we could use more of. It's obviously just hard to produce, but I don't know if it's meant to be sold, those types of experiences. I think it's something that's just meant to be lived and shared.
Right. And remembered, right? Something that has a kind of impact on the mind and on the body in a way that, you take away something from it and it stays with you and it continues to be part of your kind of, cultural literacy or your sort of cultural background that is, in some ways enduring and fruitful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Kendall, I think when we talk about sort of like some of the different models that are out there, different approaches, some of the things we like, some of the ways that people participate in these models and go experience these things. And as you mentioned, like some people come in and there's this amazing installation and a million things to look at and they just kind of like walk through the room and leave and really don't soak it all in and stuff like that. And you think about like these behaviors and just and I think like Cohart is really taking like a different approach. I think it's represented by the success that you're having and and talking about past models and the things that didn't work and stuff like that. I'm kind of curious, like, when I started like researching for inversion art, I really, to be honest, did not know a ton about the art market. And, there was a lot of things I learned in talking to artists and collectors and galleries that just sort of like violated my sense of fairness and justice. I was like, wait, what? That's how it works? So much about the art world just, I think, I don't know if you would say is broken, but, there's just a lot of things about the art world that I think could be better and better serve a wider group of people. And so I'm sort of curious because one of the things I worry about or thought a lot about early on was like, it felt like we needed to sort of play within the rules of the existing art world long enough to establish ourselves before we could start to break some of those rules and do the things that we really wanted to, that felt more true to like our own vision and our own ethics. And I'm kind of curious, like, what are some things that you maybe hope to avoid becoming as Cohart grows? Like, if you become this, one of the biggest players in the space, and you're competing with like an Artsy and a Saatchi Art and whoever else, or maybe I don't know if you consider them competitors at all, given how different the experiences are. But like, what are some things you really like think about trying to avoid becoming, or things that you would like to stay true to in your model, even as you scale, which might go against sort of, being a VC backed company with certain financial expectations? Like what do you want to try to, maintain, that's like important to you ethically?
Great question. I haven't thought about this enough. I've thought more about what do we want to emanate or build towards. Again, I always think about the tightrope in my head of, credibility and accessibility, and how do you balance those lines? Also, how do you have the right amount of artists and collectors? And, Saatchi has 100,000 artists, I think, and most of my peers don't even know what it is. And I think that that's sort of bizarre, So yeah, I think that it's a fine line, and you need to know the market, but also not be so mystified by it that you can't see the areas of opportunity for innovation. I think the way that we are, feeling about it, and where my core values are, or how do we, again, like the Russian doll stacking system. The artist is always the littlest doll. Like by the time they're like in Gagosian, if they get there, they're like the baby Russian doll that's been like stacked up, and maybe they're already passed away by the time that they're famous. And I just, for me, I think that the way the world is moving is like everyone can be their own Russian doll in a sense. Like you don't really need to get stacked like on top of someone else. Or maybe there's ways in which, again, you can signal that you're next to another collector, you're next to another curator, next to another artist, and therefore your collective brand rises and your brand value is more credible. But it's not direct, again, ownership of. And so it's more of this bottoms up approach to value creation, which is, I think, again, an ideal that I have in my head for the future of the art world. And I think that involves artists having tools to own their own infrastructure and to manage their business more effectively. And the support that, again, is not necessarily taking away their voice, but figuring out how to amplify their voice and amplify their visions. I think it's also, again, giving collectors a microphone to talk about art that they love and artists that they love, and democratize how many voices can talk, and the types of conversations that happen and where they happen. And I think there's also an educational component for consumers. So how do you help people understand, the value of collecting, how to think about collecting, empower them with information versus just shaming them, if they're not wearing like a Birkin when they come to your gallery, so how do you really grow the market, and help more people feel empowered to participate? And so I think that's, again, more of a multifaceted approach, but it's really trying to build this infrastructure for a broader system to connect and to find each other, and to grow the general market itself. I think there's so many people that want to participate, and they just don't know how. They don't feel like it's for them. And I think if we can connect more nodes, and if more nodes are participating and know that they can participate because they've been invited to, then I think it's going to be a better outcome, that pushes the envelope of the art world, but isn't necessarily saying F you, or you're not important, but it's just like, how do we expand this? How do we move this forward and help more people engage with one another?
Do you ever, one of the things we talk about a lot with artists is that, they may have a great relationship with their gallery, and their gallery may do really great things for them. And certainly there are plenty of galleries that, there's not a whole lot negative to be said about them. But one of the things we talk to artists a lot about is the fact that, at the end of the day, they are actually not the clients of their galleries. The collectors are the clients of the galleries. And that, they may be a favored producer of product, but, at the end of the day, sometimes, it becomes clear in certain situations that they are not the client, that the client is the collector. That's the person with who is ultimately paying the gallery's bills. And sometimes, compromises get made that don't best serve the artists. I'm curious if you feel any of that pull between your two-sided marketplace. Have you experienced that there are demands or needs from the collector side, or requests or whatever, that you feel like you've got to find this unique balance, and manage the relationship in a way that is fair to both sides? I mean, do you feel that pull?
Yeah, I mean, I think with artists, we're pretty clear that, like, we're not their studio manager necessarily, but we can, like, build scalable tools that support their business. And I think that has been really important conversation to have with artists. It's like, where should we plug in? We're not going to do everything off the bat for them. Like, we're not going to write their copy for their Instagram posts, but maybe there's a way that we can really own logistics and transportation, for example. We hear from artists, like, my dream situation is that I make a sale and I go to FedEx and I say, I'm a Cohart partner, and they pack it and they ship it and they insure it, and it's great and it's authenticated. And so, again, from more of an infrastructure standpoint, like, we're trying to figure out what what's that dot that we can do really well that does add value for artists? And, maybe they're still selling through galleries, or they're still finding collectors through galleries, but they're still using Cohart as a way to like manage their business and to understand holistically like where it's at. I also think the type of collector that we have had a lot of success with have so far have been the collectors that do want to know the artist directly. And that is sort of a different type of collector, I think, than someone who, um, has more of an existing relationship with just a gallery and doesn't want to like get in the weeds with their artists. We have this one collector who just, uploaded 200 pieces to his collection, and he's really excited about Cohart because he can showcase his collection to his network, and he could show off the artists that he loves. And he's a Black collector, and a lot of the artists he collects are Black, and he like meets them and he finds them, and some of them are like huge, like prolific artists, and some of them are artists that he'll find at little studio tours. And I think for him, like, he is engaged, he is educating himself on these artists. He's on the hunt for them. He loves the experience of just being passionate about the artist, and knowing how they made things and why they made things. So I think that's a great collective for us to serve, because it does have that connection component. And not every collector is going to want to have that in-depth of an experience, or maybe they'll want to have something, again, more, they want to feel like a client, with their gallerist, which is, again, a really important piece of the market as well. So it's just like, how do you give these people that want to get more in the weeds a path to do so other than Instagram is what we're thinking about right now.
What
Instagram's like the giant in the room, right? I think that it's it does seem to be the platform that has transformed every relationship in the art space. Maybe it's done this in other fields as well, but I can't think of another, obviously Spotify and the streaming services have done this for music, but, Instagram, while also being this like major tool for celebrities and sports figures and other kind of folks, it really has upended the art world in this kind of fundamental way. And trying, I was just reading another book about the novel in the age of Amazon, and how Amazon and the Kindle and as a publishing company and as the everything store has like totally transformed the reading and the writing environment. I feel like Instagram is due for a similar type of analysis.
Yeah. I mean, that we got traction fundraising when we started calling Cohart a vertical marketplace, because there's this whole thesis around the unbundling of eBay and Facebook and Instagram and these broad networks that have these really weird verticals that get populated and become Nextdoor or become Playbook or become Twitch, for gamers or for fitness instructors or for people looking for community. And so I think for us, that was the original insight, but then now it's almost like, how do you work with Instagram? How do you give people the tools to connect through it, and to add commerce into, like, credible commerce into it, because people, again, they want to be their own Russian doll. Like, they want to have their own brand, and they want to like have that be presented in their own voice, and they don't necessarily want to just be absorbed into like a bigger fish tank that is Cohart or is something else. Sometimes they might, but people are super sensitive about putting their work in certain places, and rightfully so. It affects your brand. Like, your brand is your value.
Context matters, right?
Yeah,
context matters.
So Instagram really has given, I think, people a space and a forum to express their voice and express their unique artistic identity. Again, as collectors, as artists, as advisors, as curators. Like, you could have a website in a vacuum, or you could have an Instagram. And if you have a personal website, it's like maybe people don't even find you, right? So it's there's not that broad network that's connecting people in the art ecosystem, like LinkedIn, for example. And a lot of that interaction and networking happens offline. So it's a really interesting behavior.
Kendall, you mentioned gaining traction with fundraising when you started calling yourself a vertical marketplace, and I know we've had this conversation before, but like, be honest, like, how annoying is it to fundraise for Cohart?
I love fundraising so much.
like like the sentiment analysis that comes off, right? Like, where's the
Yeah,
AI sentiment analysis when you need it?
totally. I mean, it's hard to fundraise. It's hard to fundraise if you went to Parsons. It's hard to fundraise if you're building something in the art market. Like, it's hard to fundraise if you're doing something in the consumer space. Like, it's just not easy. And I think a lot of our initial ideas were that we were going to have art market people that would be our investors, and people did it like we were doing off the bat, and it felt sort of not integrated enough with the art world. So then we found more success with people in the media, collectibles, entertainment landscape, which I think has been effective for us to have a fresh take. But yeah, it's definitely not for the faint of heart, and I think it's really challenging to think about scaling an art business. People, when you go to raise money, they look at Artsy, they look at Saatchi, they go to Crunchbase, and they say, "There's nothing that's ever been $1 billion art company," and figuring out how to build a new narrative and educate people on the market and talk about the opportunity in a way that doesn't raise a bunch of flags. It's not easy, so it's yeah. I still have a smile
Yeah.
on, but it's a little grueling.
Well, I think that one of the. Sorry, go ahead, Joey.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think that it's funny when people say like, oh, there hasn't been $1 billion outcome in the art market. It's sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, well, that's probably because it's so damn hard to raise money as an art company. Same thing when I was building Earbits. It's like there was like no successes in the music space, and then I just see investors funneling money into like the dumbest flash in the pan ideas. And not really giving real consideration to companies that I felt like we're actually addressing the systemic issues in that space. I think like a big problem in that space was business models, and the really difficult insurmountable issue of paying royalties and all of these things. I just think that it's easy to say that there haven't been any big outcomes, but it's also, you could very easily point to the underfunding that happens in these sectors and say, well, how do you expect people to create big outcomes if you're not going to put any money into the space? So I just think that's definitely a consideration. And I also think I found it interesting what you said, because at Earbits as well, we did not have any investors from the music space, save for Jeff Ralston, who had run Lala and sold that company. But what we found success with was people who understood our business model. We were trying to build like the Google AdWords of the music industry, and so we ended up with like a bunch of investors that were performance advertising experts. They had come out of ad networks, they had come out of affiliate networks, they had come out of ad tech software companies and things like that, and they just like saw the model, saw the unit economics, and thought like, this looks super interesting. And they didn't really care that much that it was a music thing. They just saw, well, music's a huge market, and this is a model I understand and believe in. And so most of our investors were just people who had some affinity for the business model itself, and it didn't really matter to them what market that we were in. But everybody, of course, from the music industry knows everything that's broken, and I think they're just kind of terrified. So I think that's a lesson for like all entrepreneurs building in the cultural sector, is to find the other things about your model that are not necessarily unique to art or unique to the cultural sector, that are exist in other places, and then look for investors who have some affinity and appreciation for those aspects of what you're doing, because they can relate. As long as they can relate to something, it can give them more interest and faith in what you're doing. So I think like that's an interest. It's interesting that you had that experience too. Jonathan, do you have anything else before we move into the more opinions segment of the show?
No, I think I'm good.
All right. So, Kendall, we call this the MO podcast, and we've been intentionally ambiguous about what the MO stands for. We've covered your magnum opus, which hopefully will be Cohart one day. We've talked about your modus operandi, so like how you get things done. And now we're on to the more opinions section of the MO podcast. So, I think this is the only question we tend to prep our guests for, so that they don't, get blindsided for it. But what's another person or project in the creative space or the cultural sector that you're really excited about and admire, and why?
Yeah, as we spoke about, my heart is it's always been in the installation world. I love immersive installation art, and The one that came to mind for me today was this group called Captain Boomer Collective that does site-specific uh, setups of beached whales throughout the world, and they act like scientists, and they wear little clipboards and like little white suits, and they act like they're investigating the whole scene. And it would be like a giant 30-foot fake whale that they fabricate, and I think they're like kind of this underground collective based in Belgium. I don't know, I just think it's so cool. I think it's such an interesting way to have a dialogue with people in public space, and to think about global warming in a way that is more approachable and educational. And so I don't know why they came to mind today. It's just someone that they just do ridiculous things, and I think people could check them out and follow some of the projects that they do, because they're really interesting. And one other artist too that came to mind was Maya Petrick, who actually follows inversion art. I don't know if you guys know her, but she, I think, just is doing a lot of really interesting stuff with climate commentary with her work. And I know she's doing this series where she's documenting places around the world that are being affected by climate change, and then creating these portals where you can, like, holographic light boxes that you can install in your space and sort of watch it happen in real time, the coral reef or the Arctic. And so I think that work to me it's more like stuff you could have in your home, that is, again, very accessible, and the narrative it talks about is very effective and impactful. And I think it just makes us more informed and aware as everyday people.
Those are awesome. That gives me great hope for this segment of the show, because that's super cool, and I never heard of anything like that. So I'm definitely rushed after this to go check that out. Okay, so the massive opportunity question. So if you had $10 million in startup capital to build something besides Cohart, what would it be? What would you make?
I haven't even had time and space to think about something like this. Yeah, I probably would do something in climate tech. I think it's again, I think what I'm doing in the art world is impactful and important, and I care deeply about it. It's like when I wake up in the mornings, when I think about, and whenever I meet an artist, to me, they're the most powerful people in society. Like, I just love art, but it's not like art is going to solve global warming necessarily. Maybe Maya's work can, or Captain Boomer Collective. But I think if I were to do another company, it would be something that had tangible impact in a world problem, probably around climate change, that could help, and help make the world a better place, and help reduce the impact of climate change, and drive consumer awareness towards that. So.
No, that's great. That's great. I think we're about to go in the completely opposite direction of making the world a better place with this last question. But, if you could steal one work of art from a major museum and get away with it, or from anywhere really, but if you could steal a major work of art and have it for yourself, what would you steal?
We could phrase this differently. If you had to save one work of art from the rising tides of global climate catastrophe and squirrel it away on a space station, which one would you select?
It's another really hard one. Again, I'm just in this installation team. I want a big enough house to have that Ragnar the Visitor's piece in my home.
Oh, really?
I don't even know how to pronounce his
Living
last name.
with it.
Kajarson. Yeah, I want to live with that soundtrack.
Yeah. Ragnar Gartensen. Yep.
I want that in my home, and I don't know if I could steal the projectors.
It'd be very strange having those people, singing in your house on like some random schedule, and then you've got to feed them, and then they're like wandering in and out. That's an odd choice. It's brave. That's aggressive.
I need a big house for all the installation art that I will steal from all the museums. But I love it. I think it's, every time I'm there, I spend 3 hours in there. So I know it's weird, but maybe I'll just become part of the artwork and try to, get into Ragnar's next creation.
I think that's I have a great image now of that, a slow sort of like pan out from that shot, like through a big sort of ornate room, through a window, and then eventually you realize like it's on a space station somewhere, and these people are just kind of like hurtling through space to try and sort of maintain this small bit of cultural creation for the ages.
Yeah, but what we got to do, to keep culture alive.
Awesome. Well, Kendall, I knew this would be a fun chat. We super appreciate you coming on the show, and I'm glad to see Cohart just doing better than the startups who have come before you. You deserve to see some serious success with this project. I think you're a very generous entrepreneur, and you've been a great friend to Inversion. So I really hope things go amazing for you, and it seems like they will. So thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm equally excited to watch Inversion Art grow and to be able to connect with you both and do something disruptive in the art market that, new models that need to exist.
Yeah, absolutely.
New models.
New models.
Space stations full of art.
Installation art.
Thanks, Kendall. Yeah.
Thanks,
exactly.
guys.
Space stations filled with installation art. Exactly.
Thank you, Kendall. We'll see you again.
Thank you.